Rain hammered against the glass towers of downtown Chicago as if the sky itself refused to hold back. I still remember that morning because everyone inside my office talked about the weather, but no one paid attention to the woman standing alone near the front entrance. She looked exhausted, soaked from head to toe, her hands trembling as she clutched an old handbag against her chest. Employees hurried past her with umbrellas and coffee cups, assuming she was waiting for someone who had forgotten to pick her up. They had no idea who she was. They had no idea she had once looked me in the eyes and declared, in front of an entire room full of people, "You'll die poor. My daughter married a failure 8 months earlier." Those words had echoed through my mind louder than anything else I had ever heard. They didn't just embarrass me. They challenged everything I believed about myself, my marriage, and my future. Back then, I walked away with nothing except my wife, my determination, and the painful realization that some people will judge your entire future based only on your present circumstances. Now, as the doors opened and my black SUV rolled to a stop outside the building, that same woman slowly lifted her eyes toward me. The confidence she once carried had disappeared. The woman who had laughed while others watched in silence could barely look at me. She wasn't there to insult me this time. She wasn't there to tell me I would never succeed. She had come because life had placed her in a position she never imagined she would face. She needed something only I could give her. And before this day was over, every member of our family would be forced to confront choices that would leave scars, restore broken relationships, and answer one question that had remained buried beneath years of pride and resentment. Would I help the woman who had done everything she could to convince her own daughter that marrying me had been the biggest mistake of her life? Stay with me until the very end, because what happened over the next 24 hours changed our family forever in ways none of us could have predicted. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Margaret Collins, and for most of her life she had believed that money revealed a person's true worth. Success, in her eyes, wasn't measured by kindness, loyalty, or perseverance. It was measured by the neighborhood you lived in, the car you drove, the clothes you wore, and the size of your paycheck. I learned that lesson the very first time I met her, although I didn't fully understand it until much later. My name is Ethan Parker, and if someone had told me earlier that the woman waiting outside my office would someday ask me for help with tears in her eyes, I would have laughed because it sounded impossible. Margaret wasn't the kind of person who admitted she needed anyone. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she always made the right decisions. She had built a comfortable life alongside her husband, raised their only daughter, Emily, and surrounded herself with people who admired wealth and appearance. To Margaret, first impressions were everything, and unfortunately for me, my first impression came during one of the lowest points of my entire life. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder whether things would have unfolded differently if I had met her when my career was thriving instead of when everything around me seemed to be falling apart. But then again, perhaps none of us truly reveal our character when life is easy. When pride collides with disappointment, between holding on to resentment or reaching toward grace. Before we can understand why Margaret stood outside my office that rainy morning, we have to go back 8 months earlier to a family dinner that began with polite conversation, yet ended with words that neither she nor I would ever forget. If you had walked past that office building that morning, you probably would have seen nothing more than an elderly woman waiting in the rain. You would have assumed she was meeting a relative, waiting for a ride, or simply resting before heading somewhere else. That's the remarkable thing about life. The biggest turning points often look ordinary from the outside, No one standing on that sidewalk knew they were looking at a woman whose pride had finally collided with reality. Number one knew she had spent years believing she would never have to ask me for anything. As I stepped out of the SUV, I noticed she tried to straighten her posture the way she always had whenever she wanted to appear in control. It didn't work this time. The confidence that once filled every room she entered had been replaced by hesitation. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. For just a moment, we simply looked at each other, and in that silence I found myself remembering the day she told me I would never amount to anything. Funny how the mind works. Years of memories can return in the space of a single heartbeat. You may be wondering how two people could reach a point where one is left standing outside the other's office, asking for help. That's exactly the question I asked myself as I walked toward the entrance. Was this really about money? Had something happened to Emily that I didn't know about? Had Margaret lost everything? Or was there another reason she had come looking for me after 8 months of complete silence? Every possibility raced through my mind, but none of them prepared me for what I would eventually hear inside that office. What I didn't know then was that the answer stretched back much further than that rainy morning. It stretched back to a family that valued appearances more than honesty, success more than character, and pride more than understanding. Looking back now, I realized the warning signs had always been there. I simply chose to ignore them because I believed love could overcome almost anything. Sometimes it can. Other times, love is tested by the people who are supposed to protect it. Margaret had never hidden her opinion of me. She didn't whisper her concerns behind closed doors or share them quietly with friends. She made sure everyone knew exactly how she felt. To her, I was the man who had stolen her daughter's future. Emily, however, saw something completely different. She saw the man who stayed up all night helping neighbors repair storm damage without asking for $1 in return. She saw the man who worked overtime to save for our first home, who celebrated every small victory with gratitude, and who believed that a person's worth could never be measured by the balance in a bank account. Emily often told me that her mother would eventually come around once she got to know me better. I wanted to believe that. I truly did, but every family gathering seemed to widen the distance between Margaret and me instead of bringing us closer. Every conversation felt like another opportunity for her to remind me that I wasn't good enough for her daughter. I kept telling myself to be patient because families are complicated and relationships take time. I had no idea that one dinner would erase every bit of progress we thought we had made. Before I tell you about that evening, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone judge your entire future based on one difficult season of your life? Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you worked, someone had already decided who you were and refused to see anything beyond your current circumstances? If you have, then you already understand part of this story. The hardest battles are often fought without anyone else noticing. The smiles we wear can hide disappointment, fear, and uncertainty that even our closest friends never see. 8 months before Margaret waited outside my office, I was fighting one of those battles. I believed I was doing everything I could to build a better future for Emily and me, but life had different plans. And when the opportunity came for Margaret to say what she had been thinking all along, she didn't hesitate for even a second. It happened during what was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday family dinner, and before that night was over, every person sitting around that table would witness words that changed the direction of my life forever. To understand why Margaret Collins believed I would never become anything, you first have to understand the kind of life she had spent decades building. She wasn't born into wealth. Emily told me countless stories about how her parents struggled during the early years of their marriage. Her father, Robert Collins, worked long hours while Margaret took whatever job she could find to help pay the bills. They sacrificed vacations, postponed dreams, and lived paycheck to paycheck. for years before finally reaching financial stability. Somewhere along the way, however, success stopped being something they appreciated and became something they worshipped. Margaret slowly convinced herself that financial success separated winners from losers, and once that belief settled into her heart, it shaped every decision she made. She admired people with impressive titles, expensive homes, and luxury cars. She spoke proudly about neighbors who climbed the corporate ladder and often compared their accomplishments with everyone else's. It wasn't enough for someone to be honest or hardworking. In Margaret's eyes, if you weren't visibly successful, then you simply weren't trying hard enough. I don't believe she intended to become that person. Life has a way of changing people, little by little, until they no longer recognize the values they once held. By the time Emily introduced me to her parents, Margaret had spent years surrounding herself with people who celebrated wealth above everything else, and I walked into that environment carrying nothing more impressive than a reliable work ethic and dreams that hadn't yet become reality. Emily and I couldn't have been more different from the image her mother wanted for her. We met completely by accident at a neighborhood charity event where volunteers were helping repair homes damaged by severe storms. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I simply believed that if people needed help and I had two working hands, then I should show up. Emily spent the entire afternoon painting walls beside me, and somewhere between laughter, spilled paint, and shared sandwiches, we realized we enjoyed each other's company more than either of us expected. What attracted us wasn't money or status. It was kindness, patience, and the feeling that we could face life's challenges together. We dated for nearly 3 years before getting married, and during those years we built our relationship on simple moments. Instead of expensive experiences, we celebrated promotions with homemade dinners, took weekend road trips instead of luxury vacations, and talked endlessly about the future we hoped to create together. We dreamed about buying a home, raising children, and building a life filled with peace rather than prestige. Emily always reminded me that happiness wasn't something you purchased. It was something you created through the people you loved and the choices you made every day. I believed exactly the same thing. Looking back now, I realize those conversations became the foundation that carried us through the hardest season of our marriage. At first, Margaret tried to hide her disappointment. She smiled politely whenever we visited, asked me questions about work, and congratulated me on the promotion I had recently received at the logistics company where I worked. Even then, I sensed she was measuring every answer I gave against expectations I could never satisfy. She casually asked about my salary, whether I planned to pursue an executive position, and when I intended to purchase a larger home. The conversations always sounded friendly on the surface, but there was an unmistakable message beneath every question. She believed my value depended on my income. Emily noticed it too. Although she always hoped time would soften her mother's attitude, she often apologized to me after family dinners, insisting that Margaret simply wanted the best for her daughter, struggled to express it in healthy ways. I accepted those explanations because I loved Emily and didn't want to become the reason she felt caught between her husband and her parents. I convinced myself that earning Margaret's respect would simply require patience, consistency, and time. Unfortunately, life had other plans waiting just around the corner. Only a few months after our wedding, everything changed in ways I never expected. The company where I had worked faithfully for almost 8 years announced a major restructuring after losing several large contracts. Rumors spread through the office for weeks before management finally gathered everyone together for an announcement that would alter hundreds of lives. Entire departments were eliminated in a single afternoon, and my position disappeared with them. Walking out of that building, carrying a small cardboard box filled with personal belongings remains one of the hardest moments I've ever experienced. It wasn't just the loss of a paycheck. It felt like losing stability, confidence, and the future Emily and I had carefully planned together. I still remember sitting inside my truck in the parking lot for nearly an hour before driving home because I couldn't bring myself to tell my wife that our lives had changed so suddenly. When I finally walked through our apartment door, Emily looked at me once and immediately knew something was wrong. She didn't ask about money first. She didn't ask how long we'd survive. She wrapped her arms around me and said, "We'll figure this out together." Those 5 words carried more value than every opinion Margaret Collins would ever have. At the time, I believed losing my job was the greatest challenge our marriage would face. I had no idea the real test wasn't unemployment. The real test would come a few weeks later, during what everyone expected to be an ordinary Sunday dinner at Margaret and Robert's house, where one conversation would expose what people truly believed about me and change our family forever. The invitation for Sunday dinner arrived only 3 days after I lost my job. Emily asked me if I wanted to stay home instead, knowing I was still trying to process everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to make an excuse, avoid the uncomfortable questions, and spend the evening anywhere else. But another part of me believed hiding would only make things worse. Margaret and Robert would eventually learn that I had been laid off, and I preferred they hear it directly from me, rather than through relatives or social media. I told Emily we should go. I remember putting on the same navy blue shirt I had worn to family dinners before, hoping that if I looked confident enough, maybe I would begin to feel confident again. During the drive to her parents' house, neither of us spoke very much. Emily reached over several times to squeeze my hand, reminding me without words that we were facing this challenge together. I kept telling myself it would be a simple dinner. We'd answer a few questions, enjoy the evening, and head home. I had no way of knowing that before the night was over, I would hear words that would stay with me every single day for the next 8 months. Margaret's home looked exactly as it always had. Every flower bed was perfectly maintained, every window spotless, and every room arranged with the kind of precision that made guests feel as though they were stepping into the pages of a luxury magazine. Family members were already gathered in the living room, laughing over old stories while football played quietly in the background. Margaret greeted everyone with warm hugs and bright smiles. When Emily and I walked through the front door, she smiled at her daughter before giving me a quick nod that felt more like obligation than affection. Robert shook my hand firmly and asked how things were going. Before I could answer, Margaret interrupted and invited everyone to the dining room, saying dinner was ready. Looking back, I sometimes wonder whether she already knew about my job or whether everything that followed happened in the moment. Either way, the evening began peacefully enough. People complimented the food, talked about vacations, rising home values, grandchildren, and retirement plans for nearly an hour. I almost convinced myself that perhaps this dinner would be different. Perhaps the difficult conversation I had been expecting would never happen. Then Margaret placed her fork on the table, looked directly at me, and smiled in a way that immediately made my stomach tighten. She asked what sounded like a harmless question. "So, Ethan, how's work going?" The entire table became unusually quiet. Emily looked at me because she knew I wanted to be honest. I took a slow breath and explained that my company had gone through major layoffs. My position had been eliminated, and I was actively searching for another opportunity while considering a few business ideas of my own. I wasn't asking anyone for money. I wasn't asking for sympathy. I simply answered the question truthfully. Before I could say another word, Margaret let out a short laugh. At first I thought she hadn't understood what I meant, but then she leaned back in her chair and shook her head. "Business ideas," she repeated loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. That's usually what people say when they don't have a real plan. A few uncomfortable smiles appeared around the room, but no one spoke. I tried to remain calm and explained that I had already begun researching opportunities and intended to work harder than ever until I got back on my feet. Margaret wasn't interested in hearing the rest. She looked at Emily before turning back toward me, and the expression on her face changed from disappointment to something much colder. "I warned my daughter about this," she said without lowering her voice. "I told her that marrying a man without real ambition would eventually leave her carrying the entire marriage." Emily immediately told her mother to stop, but Margaret continued as though she hadn't heard a single word. She reminded everyone at the table about the promotions other husbands in the family had received, the homes they had purchased, and the successful careers they had built. Then she looked directly into my eyes and delivered the sentence that would replay in my mind for months afterward. "You'll die poor, Ethan. My daughter married a failure, and unless she opens her eyes soon, she spend the rest of her life paying for your mistakes." The room became completely silent. I looked around the table hoping someone would say something, anything at all. Robert lowered his eyes toward his plate. Emily's cousins stared at their glasses. Even relatives who clearly looked uncomfortable remained silent. It wasn't only Margaret's words that hurt. It was realizing how quickly everyone else allowed those words to hang in the air without challenge. Emily stood up immediately and told her mother she had gone too far. She said she believed in me, that losing a job didn't define a person's future, and that our marriage wasn't built on a paycheck. Margaret dismissed her with a wave of her hand and said Emily was too emotional to see reality. I realized then that nothing I said would change Margaret's opinion. I could defend myself, argue, or raise my voice, but it would only create a bigger scene. So I quietly pushed my chair back, thanked Robert for dinner, and walked toward the front door. Emily called after me and followed without hesitation, leaving everyone else sitting in stunned silence. The moment we stepped outside, the cool evening air felt heavier than anything I had experienced in years. I stood beside my old pickup truck without saying a word while Emily apologized over and over for something that wasn't her fault. Finally, I looked back at the house, where the lights still glowed through the windows, and I made a promise to myself that I never shared with anyone. I wasn't going to spend my energy proving Margaret wrong. I was going to spend every ounce of it building a future that no one's opinion could ever take away from me. At that moment I still had no job, very little savings, and no clear roadmap for what came next. All I had was determination. What I didn't know was that the decision I made in that parking lot would begin a chain of events that would completely transform my life over the next 8 months, while at the very same time, the life Margaret had spent decades building was quietly beginning to fall apart. The days that followed that dinner became some of the longest I had ever lived through. Every morning I woke up before sunrise with the same goal in mind: find work, provide for Emily, and prove to myself that one difficult season would not define the rest of my life. I updated my resume so many times that I eventually stopped counting. I sent applications to companies across Illinois and neighboring states. Every interview seemed promising until it ended with the familiar words, "We'll let you know." Days turned into weeks, and those follow-up calls never came. The job market had become more competitive than I expected, and every rejection chipped away at my confidence. I tried not to let Emily see how discouraged I felt, but she always knew. She could tell by the way I stared at my laptop after another unanswered email, or by the way I quietly folded another rejection letter before throwing it into the trash. Still, she never complained. Instead, she found small ways to remind me that we were still moving forward together. She began preparing meals at home more often to save money, canceled subscriptions we rarely used, and insisted that none of those sacrifices mattered because they were temporary. Every evening she asked me the same question: "What's our next step?" She never asked if we were going to make it. She always assumed we would. Looking back now, I realized that kind of faith can carry someone much further than money ever could. Our savings account, however, didn't share Emily's optimism. Every bill that arrived reminded us that unemployment has a way of shrinking time. Rent, utilities, insurance, groceries, fuel, and countless other expenses continued, arriving right on schedule while my income had completely disappeared. I sold several pieces of equipment I had collected over the years, canceled hobbies that cost money, and even considered selling my old pickup truck until Emily convinced me we still needed reliable transportation. Friends offered encouragement, but encouragement doesn't pay bills. A few relatives suggested temporary jobs that barely covered basic expenses. Others quietly avoided the subject altogether because they didn't know what to say. Meanwhile, word about what happened during Margaret's family dinner slowly spread among extended relatives. Nobody repeated her exact words to my face, but I could see it in certain conversations. Some people looked at me with sympathy. Others looked at me with doubt. I began realizing something uncomfortable about human nature. Many people celebrate your dreams while everything is going well. But the moment life becomes difficult, some quietly begin wondering whether those dreams were unrealistic from the beginning. Margaret certainly believed they were. Emily later admitted that her mother continued calling several times each week, encouraging her to leave me before our financial situation became even worse. Margaret insisted she was trying to protect her daughter. Emily answered every phone call with the same response: "I'm staying with my husband." Hearing those words strengthened me more than she probably realized. Even while searching for traditional employment, I couldn't ignore an idea that kept returning to my mind. Years earlier, while working in logistics, I had noticed how many small manufacturing companies struggled with inventory management, shipping coordination, and warehouse efficiency. Large corporations hired expensive consulting firms, but smaller businesses often couldn't afford that level of support. I began wondering whether there was room for someone willing to provide practical solutions at a reasonable cost. At first, it seemed impossible. I had no investors, no office, and no clients. I barely had enough savings to keep our lights on. Every logical part of my mind told me this wasn't the right time to start a business, but another part of me remembered the promise I had made outside Margaret's house. I wasn't going to spend my life chasing approval. I was going to build something meaningful. I spent hours watching educational videos, reading business case studies, studying successful entrepreneurs, and learning everything I could about consulting, operations, marketing, and client acquisition. My dining room table slowly disappeared beneath notebooks, spreadsheets, and handwritten plans. Emily often fell asleep on the couch while I continued working into the early hours of the morning. There were nights when exhaustion made me question whether I was wasting precious time on an impossible dream. Then I would remember Margaret's voice telling me I would die poor, and instead of discouraging me, those words pushed me back to work. About 6 weeks after that family dinner, something happened that completely changed the direction of my journey. An old colleague named Daniel called unexpectedly. We hadn't spoken in months, and I assumed he was simply checking in after hearing about the layoffs. Instead, he told me about a small family-owned manufacturing company located just outside Chicago. The owner was dealing with shipping delays, inventory problems, and growing customer complaints. 2 larger consulting firms had already turned down the project because the company couldn't afford their fees. Daniel knew I had experience solving exactly those kinds of problems, and he asked whether I would at least meet with the owner. My first reaction was hesitation. I wasn't running a consulting business. I didn't even have business cards. I had no office, no employees, and no guarantee I could deliver the results they needed. Daniel listened patiently before saying something that has stayed with me ever since. "Ethan, every successful business begins with one client who decides to take a chance on someone." After we ended the call, I sat quietly for several minutes staring at the notebook lying open in front of me. Everything I had been studying suddenly became real. This wasn't a theory anymore. It was an opportunity. A risky one, certainly, but an opportunity all the same. I looked over at Emily, who smiled before I even explained the phone call. Somehow she already knew what I was thinking. She simply said, "I believe you're ready." At that moment, I made the decision that would reshape our future. I accepted the meeting, fully aware that if I failed, Margaret would probably point to it as proof that she had been right all along. But if I succeeded, everything we believed about our future might finally begin to change. The meeting with the owner of that small manufacturing company lasted almost 3 hours. Although it felt much shorter, I walked into the building carrying nothing except a notebook, a laptop, and weeks of preparation. Across the table sat a man named Thomas Reynolds, whose family had spent more than 30 years building a business they feared was slipping away. Rising shipping costs, delayed deliveries, inventory mistakes, and poor warehouse organization had pushed the company into a difficult position. Thomas admitted that he had already spoken with 2 consulting firms, but their proposals cost more than his company could afford. As he explained the problems, I realized something important. He didn't need someone to impress him with complicated business language. He needed someone willing to understand his business as if it were their own. Instead of making promises I couldn't guarantee, I asked questions. I wanted to know how orders moved through the warehouse, why certain products were consistently delayed, how employees communicated with one another, and where mistakes usually occurred. By the end of our conversation, I had filled nearly an entire notebook with observations. Before leaving, I told Thomas something I genuinely believed. I said, "I can't promise perfection, but I promise you'll get everything I've got." He looked at me quietly for a few seconds before extending his hand across the table. "That's more honesty than anyone else has given me," he replied. "Let's see what you can do." That handshake became the first contract of my life. Although at the time neither of us realized how significant it would become, the following weeks became a blur of long days and even longer nights. I arrived at the warehouse before most employees and often left long after everyone else had gone home. I walked every aisle, observed every process, spoke with forklift operators, warehouse supervisors, delivery drivers, office staff, and anyone willing to explain how things actually worked, instead of how management believed they worked. I discovered that many of the company's biggest problems weren't caused by lazy employees or poor products. They were caused by outdated systems, communication breakdowns, and years of temporary fixes that had slowly created larger issues. Rather than recommending expensive software or massive restructuring, I focused on practical improvements the company could afford immediately. We reorganized inventory based on shipping frequency, simplified receiving procedures, improved communication between departments, and created tracking systems that reduced costly mistakes. None of those changes happened overnight. There were setbacks almost every week. Some employees resisted new procedures because they had been doing things the same way for years. Others doubted someone without a large consulting firm behind him could solve problems professionals had overlooked more than once. I drove home wondering whether Margaret had been right about me after all. But every morning I returned because giving up would have guaranteed failure, while continuing at least left room for success. Emily remained my greatest source of encouragement through every difficult day. She reviewed proposals with me late at night, helped organize paperwork, answered emails when I became overwhelmed, and celebrated every small improvement as though it were a major victory. She never asked how much money we would make. She only asked whether we were helping people, because she believed that if we focused on creating value, everything else would eventually follow. 3 months after that first meeting, Thomas invited me into his office with a smile I hadn't seen before. He handed me a report showing that shipping delays had dropped significantly, inventory accuracy had improved beyond expectations, and customer complaints were falling for the first time in years. Even more encouraging, several longtime clients who had considered taking their business elsewhere decided to stay after. Noticing the improvements, Thomas leaned back in his chair and laughed before saying, "Ethan, you've done more for this company in 90 days than anyone else has managed in years." Hearing those words nearly overwhelmed me because they reminded me how different encouragement sounds compared to criticism. Margaret had looked at my circumstances and decided my future. Thomas looked at my effort and decided to give me an opportunity. That single decision changed everything. Within weeks, Thomas began recommending my services to business owners he knew through local manufacturing associations. One referral became two became five. Soon I found myself driving from one company to another, helping small businesses improve operations, reduce waste, and strengthen their organizations. I wasn't becoming wealthy overnight. Far from it. Most of the money went right back into building the business, paying taxes, purchasing equipment, and creating systems that would allow me to serve more clients. But for the first time since losing my job, I wasn't wondering how we would survive next month. I was planning where we wanted the business to be next year. As the business continued growing, life began changing in quiet ways that mattered more than expensive purchases ever could. Emily and I no longer worried every time the mailbox filled with bills. We replaced anxiety with planning. Instead of discussing which expenses we had to postpone, we began discussing which goals we could finally pursue again. We rented a modest office downtown because meeting clients around our dining room table had become increasingly impractical. Hiring my first employee felt both exciting and terrifying because another family would now depend on decisions I made. Every milestone reminded me that success rarely arrives all at once. It grows through countless ordinary days when people choose persistence over discouragement. Around that same time, something unexpected began happening within Margaret's social circle. Friends mentioned hearing my name at business events. A neighbor told her about a consultant helping local companies improve efficiency, only to discover it was her own son-in-law. Robert quietly congratulated Emily during a phone call after reading an article in a local business newsletter highlighting several growing consulting firms, including mine. Margaret dismissed every conversation with the same response. She insisted the business wouldn't last. She said beginners often experience temporary success before reality catches up with them. She convinced herself that what people were saying couldn't possibly be true, because accepting my progress would also mean admitting she had judged me too quickly. What Margaret didn't realize was that while she continued predicting my fate, events were already unfolding inside her own home that would soon challenge everything she believed about security, success, and control. By the time she finally accepted that my life had changed, her own circumstances had already begun changing in ways she never saw coming. While my business was slowly finding its footing, Margaret Collins remained convinced that everything she heard about my success had been exaggerated. Whenever neighbors mentioned seeing my company working with local manufacturers, she brushed the conversation aside. When relatives complimented Emily for standing beside me through difficult times, Margaret insisted they were celebrating too soon. She often told Robert that small businesses came and went every day and that I would eventually realize I should have found a traditional corporate job instead. Robert rarely argued with her, but I later learned that he had begun paying closer attention. Unlike Margaret, he understood what it meant to start with nothing because he had done exactly that decades earlier, quietly, without telling anyone. He searched for my company's website, read client testimonials, and even called one of the business owners I had worked with. Every person he spoke to told the same story. They described someone who arrived early, listened carefully, solved practical problems, and treated every business as though it belonged to his own family. One evening, Robert gently suggested to Margaret that perhaps she had judged me too harshly. Instead of considering the possibility, she became defensive. She reminded him that she had only wanted Emily to have financial security. She insisted that one good season didn't erase what she believed were years of poor decisions. Looking back now, I don't think Margaret was protecting her opinion anymore. I think she was protecting her pride. Admitting she had been wrong would have required facing something much harder than losing an argument. It would have required admitting that she had deeply wounded the very family she claimed she wanted to protect. Around that same time, changes were quietly taking place inside the Collins household. But unlike the challenges Emily and I had faced together, Margaret chose to keep these problems hidden from everyone around her. Robert had invested a significant portion of their retirement savings into a commercial real estate partnership recommended by a longtime acquaintance. For years, the investment had generated dependable returns, giving them confidence that their financial future was secure. Then the market shifted. Several major tenants left the properties. Refinancing became increasingly difficult, and payments that had once arrived like clockwork suddenly stopped. At first, Robert believed the situation was temporary. He assured Margaret that the market would recover and everything would return to normal. Instead, the financial reports grew worse each month. Their investment value dropped far beyond what either of them imagined possible. Just as they were trying to understand those losses, Robert suffered a serious heart attack that required emergency surgery, followed by months of rehabilitation. Although he survived, the recovery brought medical expenses their insurance did not fully cover. Suddenly, the couple who had always appeared financially untouchable found themselves facing bills they had never planned for. Margaret continued attending social events wearing the same confident smile, but behind closed doors she was quietly selling jewelry she had treasured for years, canceling vacations and delaying payments while hoping circumstances would improve before anyone noticed. Pride can be expensive, especially when it prevents people from asking for help before small problems become overwhelming. Emily began noticing changes long before I did. Her mother stopped inviting family over as often as she once had. Phone conversations became shorter. Holiday plans were postponed without clear explanations. Emily suggested visiting several times, but Margaret always found reasons to delay. She claimed they were remodeling the house, traveling, or simply too busy. None of those explanations felt convincing. Yet Emily respected her mother's wishes and gave her space. Looking back, I wish we had understood what was happening. Perhaps we could have helped sooner, or perhaps Margaret wasn't ready to accept help from anyone, especially from me. Meanwhile, my schedule grew busier than ever. New clients continued arriving through referrals, and our small office expanded to include additional employees. Every achievement reminded me of the promise I had made outside Margaret's house 8 months earlier. I wasn't building this business to prove someone wrong anymore. Somewhere along the journey, my motivation had changed. I genuinely love helping struggling businesses regain stability because I knew what it felt like to wonder whether everything you had worked for was slipping away. Ironically, while I spent my days helping companies recover from operational problems, I had no idea that Margaret and Robert were fighting their own financial crisis. Only a few miles away, the turning point came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Emily received a call from one of her mother's closest friends. The woman sounded unusually concerned and cautiously asked whether Emily had spoken to her parents recently. She explained that she had visited the Collins home earlier that week and noticed moving boxes stacked throughout several rooms. Robert appeared exhausted, and Margaret seemed unlike herself, avoiding even simple conversations. Emily immediately tried calling both of her parents, but neither answered. That evening she drove to their house alone, because she didn't want to assume the worst. When she returned home, the expression on her face told me everything before she said a single word. Tears filled her eyes as she explained that the house had been listed for sale. Robert admitted the investment losses had been devastating, and medical bills had consumed much of what remained. They had managed to hide the situation for months by borrowing against savings and delaying difficult decisions. But those options had finally disappeared. As heartbreaking as that news was, one detail stayed with me more than anything else. Emily told me her mother had refused every suggestion that we might be able to help. Margaret had looked at her own daughter and quietly said, "I can't ask Ethan for anything after everything I said." Hearing those words left me sitting in silence for a long time. For the first time since that painful family dinner, I realized Margaret's greatest struggle might no longer be financial. It might be finding the courage to face the consequences of the words she could never take back. 2 days later, on a cold, rainy morning outside my office, I would discover just how difficult that moment had become for her. As I stepped out of the SUV that rainy morning, time seemed to slow in a way I had never experienced before. My employees greeted me as they usually did, but their voices faded into the background the moment I saw Margaret Collins standing near the entrance. The rain had soaked through her coat, her hair clung to her face, and her hands shook slightly as she tightened her grip on the worn leather handbag she carried. This was the same woman who had once walked into every room with complete confidence, convinced she always had the right answer and the final word. Now she looked like someone carrying a burden too heavy to explain. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. 8 months of silence stood between us. 8 months since the family dinner where she had declared that I would die poor and that her daughter had married a failure. I could still remember every word she had spoken, every face around that table, and the silence that followed after she finished. Those memories hadn't disappeared simply because my circumstances had changed. They were still there, quietly waiting beneath the surface. As I looked at Margaret standing in the rain, I found myself wondering whether she remembered that evening as clearly as I did. Judging by the expression on her face, I had a feeling she did. I slowly walked toward her, unsure of what either of us was supposed to say first. Before I could speak, she lowered her eyes and quietly said, "Good morning, Ethan." It was the first time I had ever heard uncertainty in her voice. There was no criticism, no confidence, and none of the certainty she had carried for as long as I had known her. Just those two simple words. I answered politely and asked if she had been waiting long. She hesitated before admitting she had arrived nearly an hour earlier but couldn't bring herself to walk inside. She said she had considered leaving several times because she wasn't sure I would even agree to see her. I looked toward the office entrance, where several employees glanced in our direction before continuing with their day. I realized this wasn't the place for a conversation that had clearly taken Margaret days, perhaps even weeks, to prepare herself for. I simply nodded toward the building and told her to come upstairs with me. She looked surprised. I don't think she expected the invitation to come so quickly. She quietly followed me through the lobby, without saying another word. As we entered the elevator together, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply filled with years of memories that neither of us yet knew how to put into words. When the elevator doors opened, several members of my team greeted me before heading into the morning meeting. Margaret looked around the office with quiet disbelief. It wasn't an extravagant space by corporate standards, but it was modern, professional, and filled with people who were busy solving problems for clients across the region. She noticed framed certificates on the wall, company awards, photographs from community projects, and conference rooms where employees were already discussing the day's schedule. More than once, I caught her looking at the company logo displayed near the reception desk. It wasn't the office itself that affected her the most. It was watching people treat me with genuine respect. Receptionists smiled when I walked by. Team members asked for advice before making important decisions. Clients greeted me by name during phone calls. Margaret quietly observed all of it without saying a word. I couldn't help wondering whether she was comparing this moment to the version of me she had described at that family dinner. Somewhere along the way, she had decided that losing one job meant I had lost my future. Standing inside that office, she was looking at evidence that life doesn't always follow the direction people expect. I led her into my office and offered her a seat by the window overlooking the city. She thanked me so softly I almost didn't hear it. I asked my assistant to bring us coffee before closing the door, giving us complete privacy. The room fell silent once again. Margaret wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup without taking a sip. She seemed to be searching for the right words, yet every sentence appeared to stop before reaching her lips. I had prepared myself for many possibilities. During the drive to work that morning, I wondered whether she might ask for financial help, whether Robert's health had become worse, or whether something had happened to Emily. Yet sitting across from her, I realized none of those possibilities mattered as much as the obvious struggle taking place inside her. This was a woman who had spent her entire life believing strength meant never appearing vulnerable. Now vulnerability sat quietly across from me with tears gathering in her eyes. Finally, after what felt like several minutes, she took a slow breath and whispered, "Ethan. I don't know where to begin," I answered as calmly as I could. "Start wherever you need to." She nodded, looked down at the untouched coffee, and after gathering every bit of courage she had left, she finally said the words I never imagined I would hear from her. "I need your help." The moment those words left her mouth, I realized this conversation was about far more than money. It was about pride, regret, forgiveness, and choices that would shape our family for years to come. What Margaret confessed next would completely change the way I viewed the woman I thought I knew. For a few moments after Margaret spoke, neither of us said another word. "I need your help." Those 4 words hung in the air with a weight neither of us could ignore. 8 months earlier, this conversation would have seemed impossible. The woman sitting across from me had once questioned my ability to provide for her daughter, laughed at my dreams in front of our family, and confidently declared that I would die poor. Now she could barely lift her eyes from the coffee cup resting in her hands. I wasn't interested in making her uncomfortable. Life had already done that far more effectively than I ever could. So instead of asking why she had come to me, I simply waited. Sometimes people don't need another question. They need someone willing to listen. After taking a deep breath, Margaret finally began telling me everything she had hidden for months. She explained how Robert's heart attack had changed their lives almost overnight, how the investments they had trusted for years had collapsed, and how medical bills had steadily consumed what remained of their savings. She admitted they had refinanced the house, borrowed against retirement accounts, and quietly sold personal belongings just to stay ahead of their obligations. Every decision they made solved one problem while creating another. Eventually, they reached a point where there were no good options left. Then she looked directly at me, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw something I had never seen before. Regret. Not the regret of losing money, but the regret of realizing that pride had kept her from reaching out before. Everything became so overwhelming. Margaret wiped away tears she could no longer hide and quietly said something that surprised me even more than her request for help. She apologized. There was no excuse attached to it, no attempt to justify her behavior, and no effort to shift responsibility onto anyone else. She admitted that she had judged me by my circumstances instead of my character. She confessed that she believed financial success guaranteed wisdom, while financial struggle revealed weakness. Losing nearly everything had forced her to question beliefs she had carried for decades. Then she looked at me and repeated the words she had spoken during that family dinner. I told you that you would die poor, she whispered. The truth is, Ethan, I was the one who had become poor long before I ever lost $1. I didn't interrupt because I knew she wasn't talking about money anymore. She was talking about compassion, humility, and the relationships she had damaged while chasing an image, success that disappeared. The moment life became difficult, she admitted she had almost turned around 3 different times while standing outside my office that morning because she believed I had every reason to refuse even speaking to her. If you tell me to leave, she said quietly, I'll understand. I earned that. Hearing those words brought me back to the parking lot outside her home 8 months earlier. I remembered sitting alone inside my truck, repeating her insults in my mind and wondering whether I would ever feel respected by her. For months I imagined what I might say if our positions were ever reversed. I thought about proving her wrong, reminding her of every painful word she had spoken, and allowing her to experience the same humiliation she had given me. But something unexpected happened while building my business. The anger I once carried slowly disappeared, replaced by gratitude for the lessons those difficult months had taught me. Success had changed my circumstances, but more importantly, it had changed my perspective. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the office window for a moment before turning back toward Margaret. Do you know what kept me going after that family dinner? I asked. She slowly shook her head. Your words hurt me more than you probably realized. I admitted. For weeks I replayed them every single day. Every rejection letter, every unpaid bill, every sleepless night reminded me of what you said. There were moments when I almost believed you were right, but eventually I stopped working to prove you wrong. I started working to become the husband Emily already believed I could be. Margaret quietly listened, without saying a word. I continued by telling her something I had come to understand during those 8 months. If I used this moment to humiliate you the way you humiliated me, then all I've done is continue the same cycle that hurt our family in the first place. She lowered her head as tears fell freely onto her hands. Then I said the sentence she least expected to hear. Margaret, I forgive you. She looked up immediately, almost unable to believe what she had heard. I wasn't pretending those painful memories had never happened. Forgiveness isn't pretending the past didn't exist. It means refusing to let the past control the future. I explained that forgiveness didn't erase consequences or instantly rebuild trust, but it allowed healing to begin. For the first time since entering my office, Margaret completely broke down. Years of pride, fear, disappointment, and regret poured out in tears she had probably held back for months. She apologized again, this time not because she needed financial assistance but because she finally understood the pain her words had caused. Once the emotions settled, we finally began discussing practical solutions. I reviewed their financial situation, asked questions about outstanding debts, medical expenses, and the investment losses Robert had experienced. Fortunately, years of helping struggling businesses had taught me that even difficult situations often become manageable once people stop hiding from them. I explained that I wasn't interested in simply writing a check and sending them home. That might solve today's emergency, but it wouldn't restore long-term stability or rebuild the confidence they had lost. Instead, I offered to connect them with trusted financial professionals who had helped several of my business clients reorganize debt and create sustainable recovery plans. I also assured Margaret that if immediate expenses threatened Robert's medical care or basic needs, Emily and I would make sure those necessities were covered without hesitation. She stared at me for several seconds before quietly asking, after everything I said to you ... why would you do this? I smiled gently because the answer had become clear long before that conversation. Because Emily married the kind of man she believed I could become, I replied, and because I don't want our children someday growing up in a family. Love. Margaret covered her face with both hands as she cried harder than she had at any point that morning. In that moment, I realized the greatest victory of my life had nothing to do with business, money, or success. It was discovering that the strongest response to humiliation isn't revenge. It's becoming someone who refuses to let pain determine the kind of person they choose to be. Little did I know, the most emotional chapter of our family's story was still waiting just beyond that office door. When Margaret left my office that afternoon, she looked like a different person from the woman who had stood outside in the rain just a few hours earlier. The problems waiting for her at home hadn't disappeared. Robert still needed ongoing medical care. Their debts were still real. The house was still for sale, and rebuilding their financial future would take time. Yet something had changed that no amount of money could have accomplished. For the first time in months, she wasn't carrying those burdens alone. Before she walked out, I handed her the contact information for a financial recovery specialist I trusted, arranged a meeting for the following morning, and assured her that Emily and I would help them through the transition without allowing pride to stand in the way again. She thanked me repeatedly, but eventually I gently stopped her. I told her that gratitude wasn't what our family needed most at that moment. What we needed was honesty, patience, and the willingness to rebuild relationships one conversation at a time. She nodded quietly before leaving my office. As I watched the elevator doors close behind her, I realized something that surprised even me. 8 months earlier, I had walked away from her house carrying anger. Now I was watching her leave mine carrying hope. That difference wasn't created by business success. It was created by choosing compassion when revenge would have been much easier. That evening, Emily came home earlier than usual because Margaret had called her for the first time in months. Without pretending everything was fine, I still remember the expression on Emily's face when she walked through our front door. She hugged me before saying a single word. Margaret had told her everything. She admitted how deeply ashamed she felt about the dinner where she humiliated me, confessed that she had spent months convincing herself I would reject her if she ever asked for help, and thanked Emily for refusing to give up on our marriage even when she pressured her to leave. Emily cried while telling me about the conversation because she had waited years to hear her mother speak with that kind of honesty. She told me something I had never known. After that painful family dinner, Margaret had called her almost every week encouraging her to reconsider our marriage. Yet every single time, Emily gave the same answer. She believed in me even when there was little visible evidence that things would improve. Listening to her reminded me once again that every meaningful success in my life had been built alongside someone who refused to measure my value by temporary circumstances. Later that night, the three of us sat together in Robert and Margaret's living room. Robert apologized for remaining silent during that dinner instead of defending me. He admitted that although he disagreed with many of Margaret's words, he chose the easier path by saying nothing. I accepted his apology because silence can hurt just as much as harsh words. But it can also be corrected when people are willing to acknowledge it honestly. For the first time since joining their family, I felt like we were finally speaking to one another instead of speaking past one another. The following months weren't perfect, but they were filled with progress that extended far beyond finances. Robert's health gradually improved through rehabilitation, and with guidance from experienced financial advisors, they developed a realistic plan to stabilize their situation. They sold the large house that had become impossible to maintain and moved into a smaller place that better matched their new circumstances. Surprisingly, Robert later admitted he felt more at peace there than he had in years because he no longer spent every day worrying about protecting an image of success. Margaret also changed in ways that those around her quickly noticed. She stopped comparing people based on careers, neighborhoods, or income. Instead of asking relatives about promotions and salaries during family gatherings, she began asking about their children, their health, and how they were truly doing. Friends who had known her for decades quietly commented that she seemed gentler, more patient, and more interested in listening than speaking. I believe difficult seasons have a way of revealing what truly matters. For Margaret, losing financial security forced her to discover something far more valuable than wealth. She discovered humility. She also made a point of apologizing individually to several extended family members who had witnessed that painful dinner months earlier. She told them she had judged someone she barely understood and hoped her mistake would remind everyone else never to confuse temporary hardship with permanent failure. Hearing those words from the same woman who once declared, "I would die poor," showed me that people really can change when they are willing to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. About 6 months after that rainy morning outside my office, our family gathered once again for Sunday dinner. This time, however, the atmosphere felt completely different. The meal wasn't held inside the large house where I had once been humiliated. It took place around the dining table in Robert and Margaret's modest new home. There were no expensive decorations or elaborate displays meant to impress anyone. Instead, there was laughter, honest conversation, and something our family had been missing for a long time: peace. As everyone finished eating, Margaret slowly stood from her chair and tapped her glass to get everyone's attention. The room became quiet. She looked around the table before her eyes finally settled on me. Then, in front of the same relatives who had once watched her call me a failure, she spoke words I will never forget. "Months ago," she said, "I believed success was something you could measure with a paycheck, a title, or a beautiful house. I was wrong." She paused as tears filled her eyes. "I once told Ethan he would die poor. Today I understand that he was never poor. The poorest person in this family was me because I had forgotten that character, integrity, kindness, and perseverance are worth more than anything money can buy." No one spoke for several moments. Then Margaret walked across the room and embraced me. It wasn't a dramatic moment filled with applause or celebration. It was something much quieter and far more meaningful. It was a family finally choosing healing over pride. As I reflect on everything that happened, I often return to the promise I made outside Margaret's house the night she humiliated me. Back then, I believed success would be proving her wrong. I thought the greatest victory would come from building a business she could no longer criticize. I eventually discovered that real success looked very different. Success was waking up beside a wife who never stopped believing in me. Success was helping struggling businesses rebuild instead of simply making money from them. Success was extending compassion to someone who least expected it. And perhaps most importantly, success was refusing to allow another person's opinion to become the final chapter of my story. If there's one lesson I hope stays with you after hearing everything that happened, it's this: never judge someone's future by the season they're currently living through. The person struggling today may be quietly building the strength, wisdom, and character that will transform their life tomorrow. Temporary hardship is not a permanent identity. Sometimes the people who seem to have the least are investing in qualities that will outlast every dollar they ever earn. And sometimes the greatest wealth a person can possess isn't found in a bank account at all. It's found in the ability to forgive, to grow, and to help others even after they've hurt you. Before we end today's story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you had been sitting in my chair when Margaret walked into my office asking for help after everything she had said, what would you have done? Would you have forgiven her, or would the pain have been too deep to let go? Share your answer in the comments because every perspective tells its own story. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for our next journey, where another ordinary family will face extraordinary choices that remind us how a single decision can change generations. Every family carries a story that few people outside the home ever truly understand. Some stories are filled with celebrations, Others are shaped by disappointment, misunderstanding, sacrifice, and second chances. Ours became a reminder that today's circumstances should never become tomorrow's identity. 8 months separated the moment Margaret Collins looked at me across a dinner table and declared that I would die poor from the moment she stood outside my office in the rain asking for my help. During those 8 months, life taught both of us lessons neither of us could have learned any other way. I discovered that determination, faith, and perseverance are far more powerful than someone else's opinion. Margaret discovered that wealth without humility is fragile, and that character will always outlast financial success. Neither of us would have chosen the difficult road we traveled, yet looking back, I can honestly say those painful moments reshaped our family in ways comfort never could. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this story, it's this: never underestimate someone because of the season they're in. The person struggling today may be laying the foundation for a future no one else can see. The man searching for work today may become the business owner creating opportunities for others tomorrow. The woman carrying quiet burdens today may become the strongest person in her family next year. Life has a remarkable way of changing direction when people refuse to give up. And just as important, never allow pride to keep you from admitting when you've been wrong. Pride can separate families for years, while one sincere apology can begin healing wounds that seemed impossible to repair. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you of someone in your own life, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and share your thoughts. Have you ever forgiven someone who deeply hurt you? Or do you believe some words can never truly be forgotten? We'd love to hear your perspective because your experiences matter too. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful, true-style family story filled with betrayal, redemption, justice, forgiveness, and life-changing moments. Until next time, take care of the people who believe in you. Never stop believing in yourself. And remember that your current situation is only one chapter of your story, never the ending. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.